Let's focus on the ICC Champions Trophy, which is currently underway in Pakistan. It is the 9th edition of the cricket tournament, the first time that Pakistan have hosted a global tournament in nearly 3 decades. The UAE are also hosting matches as a neutral venue for the Indian cricket team. Now, the last ICC Champions Trophy, way back in 2017, Pakistan actually won their first title that year. And as we record this episode, we are about halfway through it. Pakistan have unfortunately been knocked out, but the semi-finals are just around the corner. And to find out what it means for Pakistan and what we can expect from the remaining games, Natalie has been catching up with broadcaster and former cricketer Suhail Chandhok.
I actually really like the ICC Champions Trophy. I've always been a fan of it. I'm one of those, I guess, old school nuffies that like one day cricket. I think there's kind of a balance of all forms of cricket in it. You've got the slam bam part of it through the first bit and the last bit. I think the evolution of ODI cricket has actually been quite fantastic, given the rise of T20 cricket and given the innovation in terms of shot making. So actually, I'm glad that the tournament's back. The fact that it's back in Pakistan is another huge story, of course, in itself. Pakistan hosting an ICC tournament for the first time since 1996, if I'm not wrong, and that's huge for the nation itself. But I think just on the format coming back, look, I think you either have to kill ODI cricket altogether, or you've got to help sustain it with an ICC Champions Trophy, etc., etc. If you're still playing bilateral series, if you've still got an ICC ODI World Cup, then I think the Champions Trophy has a place. And I think I'm glad, therefore, that it's been revived because if you've got the World Cup there, and I think we saw the last World Cup and why it was so special in the ODI format, it's still got legs. So as long as it still has legs, and maybe there's a reduced number of ODIs that are played through the year, but I think an ICC tournament of this stature, it's good to have it back.
With the World Cup, that lasts just around 2 months, something like this. Whereas this tournament condensed into 2.5 weeks. It's, I think, 5 games you have to play if you're going to go on and win it. It's a tournament that leaves very little for error, Suhail.
It is, and that's kind of what I like about it. One game, one bad game, you're out pretty much. And I think we've seen that, unfortunately, for you guys in England. Australia turned up with half a squad and still beat an English side that's kind of been patchy. And, everyone writes Australia off before an ICC event, but then we forget that at an ICC event, Australia just somehow find a way to turn up. It's one of those things about Aussie cricket that just is so hard to explain. And I actually caught up with Shane Watson here a couple of days ago, and I asked him, and he said, look, I think there's something that mentally just switches on within us as Aussies. And they have this sort of switch that goes off when an ICC big ticket event turns up, where they know how to sort of hit that next gear mentally. And it's almost as if they feed off that pressure as well. I mean, chasing in excess of 300 was an unbelievable chase for what was pretty much a half-baked Aussie squad, especially in terms of the bowling. So, kudos to them. And it is an unforgiving format. Pakistan as hosts know that now, and I think they've had a couple of shocking results. So they're pretty much out of contention at home. And that, to me, is the saddest tale of them all in some sense.
Tell us, you mentioned about Pakistan hosting an ICC tournament for, nearly 3 decades, the first time they've done that. How important is it for Pakistan then to be hosting a world event like this?
I think it's massive. I've got friends of mine that studied with me in university in Australia that are in Pakistan now, and other cricketers that are in Pakistan that talk about the stature of this tournament. I don't mean stature from the tournament itself or the infrastructure and all of that jazz that came together last minute, but just the implication on tourism, just the implication on just the outward sort of look into Pakistan, right? I think the safety issues, commercials, all of this, the entire implication on Pakistan is so different from the outside world in. And I think when you pull off a tournament like this, where there's no issues on safety, and hopefully there won't be going forward, when the entire tournament is run in a smooth manner, hopefully the takeaway from this is that Pakistan can host cricket again. At the end of the day, people love watching cricket there. When you saw Glenn Maxwell, hit those winning runs off Jofra Archer, you had 35,000 people screaming. And I think that's what you want to see in the subcontinent. You get that flavor of love for sport and for cricket in Pakistan. So, you think back to India's last series there, and I remember Lakshmipati Balaji and that entire touring party becoming icons in a different nation. And there's so many implications of a good tournament for Pakistan on the democracy, on the politics of it, on the commercialization of sport again, on the revival of sport in many ways, to be able to host cricketing bilaterals or other tournaments yet again. So I think the implications are far greater than what any of us could ever imagine, because there's been such a cloud over Pakistan. And, unfortunately, for some reason, they can't shy away from it. And, that's why I think obviously tensions remain between India and Pakistan, and India doesn't play there. But I think this will help, right? It's a step in the correct direction. It's a step towards, hopefully, maybe India touring there in some point in the future. But I think there has to be more conviction for touring parties, for players to feel safe about it. And it only goes, with every tournament that's run successfully, to build that confidence for a player, for an administrator, for everyone concerned.
And as ever, if you want to hear more from Suhail, including whether India are in a better place than the turmoil they were in at the beginning of this year when we last spoke to him, you can head over to our YouTube channel. So the Champions Trophy, well and truly underway, and it's looking good for India as things stand, not so good for the host Pakistan, who pretty much have been eliminated now after their 2 defeats at the time of recording this podcast. But it's a trophy that has been welcomed back onto the ICC cricketing calendar, having been without it since 2017. I think one of the reasons they got rid of it, Ed, was because they felt as though they wanted 3 flagship events across all formats. So you've got your T20 World Cup, the World Test Championship, the Cricket World Cup as well. But there's obviously been a pull to get more 50-over cricket back on the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed watching it. Obviously, it's easy for us to say because we don't have to play in it. So all these players are saying there's too much cricket. As fans, we're like, hey, bring it on. I love watching as much cricket as possible. But I do agree that there is a place for it. I was very worried that, 8 years on since that last one in the UK, that maybe we wouldn't see the ICC Champions Trophy again. But it does fill a gap, doesn't it, in a year where there is no other kind of big ticket cricketing event. The next year, I think 2026 has the T20 World Cup, and then the ODI World Cup is in 2027. So, if it weren't for the Champions Trophy this year, nothing else really would be happening in terms of a big major cricketing tournament. And also, of course, India's refusal to play Pakistan in the non-ICC events means that if you do want to watch those 2 rivals go at it and see some fantastic competition, although it wasn't too much of a competition when they played in the Champions Trophy recently, you kind of have to have these events. And hey, the more opportunities we get to watch 2 of the most fervent cricket nations in the world, I'll take it.
Can I ask a general question for you two guys? What do you think the state of the state is when it comes to the sport of cricket? You guys come from cricketing nations where the sport has been. Is it in a good place right now? Is it being pushed out? Do they have the coverage that they deserve? Are they getting paid? Or is this just a smaller sport that's never going to be on the grand stage?
Oh, good question. I think it'll always have its place because, from an England perspective, for example, we've got our England Barmy Army. They travel across the world to support England. And cricket has a big following, especially the international cricket. Domestic cricket, that's a harder one to really lure the fans in. We've got our county championship here in England. My goodness, it's sometimes one man and his dog who's watching it, unfortunately. That's the biggest issue that those county championship sides have. But I think international cricket over here sells out pretty much every time. It doesn't even matter who the opposition is. There is that appetite for it. The one issue you might have, and maybe this is again why they brought back the Champions Trophy, is that there was a fear of the demise of the 50-over cricket format, because T20 has just taken off, as we know, with all the respective domestic leagues now. Test cricket, yes, there is always a fear with Test cricket that could die out, because do people really have the stamina for 5 days? Test cricket itself is shortening anyway. You don't tend to see Test matches go to 5 days. But I think, again, Test match cricket will always have its appeal. So I think there was a need to bring back that Champions Trophy, like you said, Ed, there, because one, we have no international tournament this summer, or this year, I should say. But it's that 50-over format that maybe just needs that little bit of a pick-me-up.
Yeah, and there's a special craft, isn't there, to 50-over matches. T20 is pretty much just blast it. and all. I mean, to be fair, the 50 overs are heading that way as well. But there, you do get that period where the spinners come into play, and each bowler gets a maximum of 10 overs. So they can really work their spell a lot better than they can in T20, where they only get 4 overs each. I do think one problem with cricket, but this is a problem that has just endured for so long, and it happens in major tournaments, is, as you said, I think in your interview with Suhail, Natalie, there is very little room for error, whether that's an error in a result or an error in the weather as well. And we just saw the South Africa-Australia game get washed out, and there are no backup days. And we've seen this in previous major tournaments as well. The fact that the rain washed out a game can have massive implications across the entire group through no fault of any team.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues. You're right. When you've got such a short tournament that you've got to come up with your solutions, whether it's those rain affected matches and you get points for that for different reasons. That's the shame about it, that it's such a condensed tournament. I think the original reason, though, they brought up the Champions Trophy, because they've always had the World Cup. They've had that for decades, but it was actually brought up to try and infiltrate cricket into emerging territories, shall we say. I think they tried it in Kenya, they tried it in Bangladesh, for example, but unfortunately they didn't really have the support that it wanted, and they maybe didn't get enough fans coming to those particular tournaments. And then the bigger nations just kind of weighed in, as they always do, and just thought, we'll take over this one as well. So I think since 2004, that's why you've seen some of these bigger nations. But I say that, you've got Afghanistan here in the Champions Trophy, who are an emerging nation when it comes to cricket, especially in the white ball cricket. So it does give a chance, an opportunity for other nations to get in and perhaps ply their trade and compete against the very best.
And one of the reasons why I asked that question, guys, is potentially, if you believe the reports, that there's some massive infusion of money possibly coming, investments coming, as people see this as the next burgeoning market. So I wanted to get the experts' point of view.